Alright, today's video is all about when expectations don't match reality. If this is your first time seeing a Busy Book Club video, welcome. My name is Mike, and on this channel we read new and interesting books so we can have new and interesting ideas. And today we are finally reading Step 5 of The Third Door by Alex Banayan. The title is Take the Third Door. We're going to wrap up this book and we'll revisit the 3 questions that we talked about at the beginning in the introduction of the book, and we'll reveal our next read. I can't wait to get started. But before we get started, I do want to acknowledge that I took a bit of a break. Doing YouTube regularly is still pretty new to me, and I think I got a little caught up trying to keep up with the daily schedule and at the same time balancing my own sense of perfectionism. Part 5 of The Third Door was huge, and I really didn't know what story to tell, and so I kind of just kept putting it off, and I never got back into it. But to keep going, I'm going to reset my standards a little bit, and I'm not going to promise daily anymore, but I am going to shoot for it. But it's not a hard promise. Alright, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking about Part 5 of the book. Part 5 of The Third Door was a lot to process, like I said earlier. There were quite a few stories, and in most of my videos, I try to find a common theme throughout whatever chapter or part of a book we're reading, and it was tough with this one. I'm actually just going to tell a couple of stories that I thought were really interesting and why they stood out to me. First, I really liked his story about his interview with Bill Gates. He came in really strong, looking for that key piece of advice, the one thing that was going to unlock his definition of success. The interview doesn't go well, and Bill Gates is kind of confused about what he's looking for. And then Alex asked this really off-the-wall question. He asked Bill Gates for his wildest, craziest, funniest hustle story, and that causes Bill Gates to open up and tell stories about negotiating with Japanese executives, and he became more relaxed because he's suddenly telling this story that he really enjoys telling, and the interview starts to go a lot better, and Alex wishes that he had started the interview off that way from the beginning. What's even worse is that he had actually been given that advice earlier, that he should just give Bill Gates the room to speak instead of trying to dig and get something specific out of him. And I think that's a really good clue for how we should engage with people in general, that if you give someone the room to speak, to tell their story, you can usually find out things that are valuable that you weren't necessarily even looking for. The other story in Part 5 that really surprised me was his interview with Pitbull. I never expected to get such a profound lesson from Mr. Worldwide. When he was asked about how he stays successful, Pitbull talks about the need to stay an intern, and it reminded me a lot of this book, Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal, where Ali talks about the beginner mindset. When you have the humility to treat yourself as a beginner, it opens you up to new possibilities and helps you see things in ways that you wouldn't have seen them before. This mindset helps you be more resilient to mistakes, because when you make a mistake, you just see it as a learning opportunity. You accept that you're a beginner rather than someone who's failed. On to those 3 questions. The 3 questions we asked at the beginning of the book were: 1, how do you find the third door? 2, how do you ask for help? And 3, when do you decide to persist and keep trying? And when do you decide to pivot and try a new approach? Starting with the first question, how do you find the third door? In many of Alex's pursuits, finding the third door meant actually just finding the right person. In so many of those cases, whether it was getting onto The Price is Right, or actually talking to Bill Gates, or talking to Lady Gaga, all of those cases, it was because he found the right person who was engaged enough with his story to help him get access to the person he was trying to meet. Once you find that person, how do you actually ask them for help? We talked about this in an earlier video. I think that Tim Ferriss email template doesn't just work for emails. I think it's the perfect thing for just general engagement. What you do is is you establish some credibility, you work on something that is related to that person in some way, you get that borrowed credibility. That was what really stood out to me, is borrowed credibility. You show that you're actively working on a project that is going to be interesting to that person, and then you write them an email that acknowledges that their status, how busy they are. You tell them what you're working on, and you just ask them one question right up front. And you be very deliberate. You don't ask them for something nebulous like a coffee chat. You ask them for something that doesn't take up a lot of their time, and you make it really easy for them to answer so that they don't have to spend a bunch of time on you. You're making it really easy to start that dialogue. And then finally, when do you decide to persist and keep trying? And when do you decide to pivot and try a new approach? I asked this question specifically because of the Warren Buffett story that I had seen in the Colin and Samir interview. And I think the best way to answer that question is to decide what you're willing to give up and sacrifice in order to achieve that thing you're looking for. It was pretty clear from Alex's experience with Warren Buffett that he was willing to do anything. He was willing to spend his money to fly out to Omaha, and he was willing to do embarrassing things like send the shoe in the mail. So I think from that side, from your side, it's really easy to decide that if you really want to go for something, you can go all out and risk embarrassment. I think the best way to think about this question is really that advice that Alex got from his mentor, Elliot Bisnow, that you need to be trying a lot of different things at the same time. You don't just focus in on one person and keep bugging them to try and get their attention. You try many different avenues. You get your story across as fast as you can. Once you know if it's compelling to them and it's getting through, then you keep going. But as soon as they say no, then you try a different approach. You move on to a different person, and that seems like the best way to move forward. I would say the time you decide to pivot and try a new approach is when the person has made it clear that they've heard your story and they're not interested. So I think this was a really interesting book to learn from. I will say that at times when I was reading this book, I had to acknowledge that the author was quite young when he actually did this. The author is actually younger than I am. The thing with this third door approach, which I love the story of the third door. Like, you don't wait in line, you don't try to become a VIP, you go to the back and you find the third door. I think that's a really compelling narrative, but I think one of the challenging things is that waiting in line and being a VIP, the club has a reason to let you in. Taking the third door approach, sometimes it can feel like a bit of a hack. You know, at times when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, I don't know if I would have done that. Like, it feels kind of pushy or forceful. You know, that includes hiding in the bathroom for Tim Ferriss, or bugging Warren Buffett's secretary, or even how he approached Larry King. All of those things just seemed really desperate and uncomfortable. Banayan was quite young when he did those things, and so you can forgive him a little bit on that. That's why the Tim Ferriss approach of showing that you're working on something relevant is so important, because when you get that credibility and you show that you're actually working on something related to that person, it just feels a little bit less cheaty. It feels less hacky. And I think that's something to remember whenever you're looking for the third door. All right. That concludes our journey of The Third Door by Alex Banayan. It's quite an interesting book. And our next book is The Geek Way by someone. Let me look. Our next book is The Geek Way by Andrew McAfee. I discovered this book by watching an interview between an executive at IBM and Malcolm Gladwell. I read the introduction and I just thought it was such an interesting book. It talked about how many of the CEOs of Silicon Valley actually went to Montessori schools, which I had heard of Montessori. I just thought it was like a new age school thing, but it turns out it's like this totally new approach to education, and it's something that I very much want to explore and learn about. So that's the next book, The Geek Way by Andrew McAfee. And again, I'm going to try and avoid having these long breaks in the future. I think it's really important to be consistent with a YouTube channel. So as you can tell, I'm resetting my own standards to fight my perfectionism a little bit, and hopefully I will be able to better maintain consistency in the near future. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.